The woman standing at the edge of the dusty Nevada street was so tall that the morning sun cast her shadow across 3 storefronts. And Penelope Sutherland had learned long ago that shadows like hers made people uncomfortable. She stood at 6 feet and 4 inches, towering over every man and woman in Genoa. And as she walked toward the general store on this scorching August morning in 1878, she could feel the familiar weight of disapproving stares settling on her shoulders like a heavy wool blanket in summer. Penelope had arrived in this small Nevada town 3 months ago with her aunt, seeking a fresh start after her parents had died in a fire back in Sacramento. At 22 years old, she had hoped that somewhere in the West, where people were supposed to be different and accepting of all kinds, she might finally find a place where her unusual height would not matter so much. But Genoa had proven to be just as judgmental as every other town she had lived in. The wooden planks creaked under her feet as she stepped onto the boardwalk, her worn boots making sounds that seemed louder than anyone else's footsteps. Women pulled their skirts aside as she passed, as though her height might be contagious. Men tipped their hats, but their eyes held that mixture of curiosity and discomfort that she had come to recognize all too well. Inside the general store, Mr. Patterson stood behind the counter, his round face already forming into that pinched expression he always wore when she entered. Penelope kept her eyes down, studying the list her aunt had written out in careful script. She needed flour, sugar, coffee, and fabric for a new dress, though finding fabric for someone of her proportions was always a challenge. "Miss Sutherland," Mr. Patterson said, his voice stiff and formal, "what can I do for you today?" She handed him the list, and he glanced at it before nodding curtly. As he gathered the items, Penelope became aware of other customers entering the store. Mrs. Henderson and her daughter, Margaret, both of them dressed in fine Sunday clothes despite it being a Tuesday. Margaret was considered one of the prettiest girls in town, petite and delicate, everything that Penelope was not. "Oh my," Mrs. Henderson said in a voice that carried perfectly through the small store. "It is quite warm today. I do hope the shade from that tree outside is sufficient." Margaret giggled, and Penelope felt her cheeks burn. She knew they were not talking about any tree. She had heard all the comparisons before. She was too tall, too ungainly, too much like a lodgepole pine and not enough like a delicate flower. "Your items, Miss Sutherland," Mr. Patterson said, placing the packages on the counter with more force than necessary. "That will be $4.20. Penelope counted out the money carefully, her long fingers making the coins look smaller than they were. As she gathered her purchases, she heard Margaret whisper to her mother, "I cannot imagine any man wanting to dance with someone like that. He would have to stand on a box." The laughter that followed was not even slightly concealed, and Penelope hurried from the store, her packages clutched against her chest. The morning sun felt oppressive now, and she walked quickly back toward the small house she shared with her aunt on the edge of town. Her eyes stung, but she refused to cry. She had shed enough tears over her height to fill a river, and it had never changed anything. Her Aunt Dorothy was in the garden when Penelope arrived home. Dorothy was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, and the contrast between them had always been stark. But Dorothy had never made Penelope feel ashamed of her height, even if she did not always understand the pain it caused. "How was town, dear?" Dorothy asked, looking up from the tomato plants she was tending. "The same as always," Penelope replied, forcing a smile. She carried the packages inside and began putting things away in the kitchen, her movements mechanical and practiced. That evening, as they sat down to dinner, Dorothy studied her niece with concerned eyes. "Penelope, you have been so quiet since we came here. I thought a new town might lift your spirits." "I appreciate everything you have done for me, Aunt Dorothy," Penelope said, pushing food around her plate. "But I think perhaps I am meant to be alone. No man wants a wife who can look him in the eye while he is standing on a chair." "Nonsense," Dorothy said firmly. "The right man will not care about such things." But Penelope had stopped believing in the right man years ago. The following Saturday, Genoa held its monthly dance at the town hall, and Dorothy insisted that Penelope attend. "You cannot hide away forever," she said, and though Penelope wanted to protest, she knew her aunt was right. Hiding had never solved anything. The town hall was decorated with lanterns and wildflowers, and a small band played lively tunes in the corner. Couples swirled across the floor, their faces bright with joy and movement. Penelope stood against the wall, wearing the best dress she owned, though even her best was plain and practical. Finding dresses long enough for her arms and legs was nearly impossible, so she had learned to sew her own clothes, adding length wherever she could. She watched as Margaret Henderson danced with 3 different partners in the first hour, her laughter ringing out like bells. Other young women were asked to dance as well, even the ones who were not particularly pretty or graceful, but no one approached Penelope. She stood alone against the wall, as tall and immovable as one of the wooden support beams, and just as unnoticed when it came to romance. "Evening," a voice said beside her, and she turned to see Sheriff Dalton, a kind man in his 50s with gray threading through his beard. "Not dancing, Miss Sutherland?" "No one has asked," she said simply. He looked uncomfortable, as people always did when confronted with the reality of her situation. "Well, that is a shame. You are a fine young woman." She appreciated the sentiment, even if she did not believe it. The sheriff moved on to make his rounds, ensuring that no one was drinking too much or causing trouble, and Penelope remained by the wall. That was when she saw him. He was standing in the doorway, hat in hand, surveying the room with calm, steady eyes. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet or more, with broad shoulders and sun-darkened skin that spoke of long days working outdoors. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at the collar of his shirt, and his face had the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from a life lived honestly and fully. Penelope watched as he moved into the room, noting how people greeted him with genuine warmth. Several men shook his hand, and women smiled at him with open friendliness. He seemed to know everyone, and everyone seemed to like him. "That's Warren Winchester," a voice said, and Penelope looked over to see Sally Morrison, one of the few women in town who had shown her any kindness. Sally was a widow in her 30s who ran the boarding house. "He has a ranch about 5 miles outside of town. Good man, from what I hear. Keeps to himself mostly, but he is honest and decent." Penelope nodded, watching as Warren made his way through the crowd. He was heading toward the refreshment table, and she could not help but notice that he moved with an easy confidence, comfortable in his own skin in a way she had never been. "Ladies," Warren said, tipping his hat to Sally and Penelope as he reached for a cup of punch. His voice was deep and warm with a slight roughness to it. "Evening, Warren," Sally said cheerfully. "Do you know Miss Sutherland? She is new to town, came here with her aunt about 3 months back." Warren turned to Penelope, and for a moment she braced herself for the reaction she always saw in men's eyes when they truly looked at her for the first time. That flicker of surprise, followed by discomfort or pity, but Warren's expression held neither of those things. He simply looked at her, his gray eyes meeting hers directly, and then he smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached his eyes and made small crinkles appear at the corners. "Miss Sutherland," he said, offering his hand. "Warren Winchester, pleased to make your acquaintance." Penelope shook his hand, surprised by how natural it felt. Usually, when she shook hands with men, They either held her fingers limply or gripped too hard, trying to assert some kind of dominance. But Warren's handshake was firm and equal, treating her as a person rather than an oddity. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Winchester," she said softly. "Call me Warren," he said. "We are not much for formality out here." Sally was called away by someone asking about a room at the boarding house, and suddenly Penelope was alone with Warren. She expected him to make an excuse and leave, as men usually did, but instead he leaned against the wall beside her, sipping his punch and watching the dancers. "Not much for dancing?" he asked. "I have not been asked," she admitted, then wished she had said something less pathetic. Warren glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "That seems odd. You are certainly pretty enough to dance with." Penelope felt her cheeks flush. She was not used to compliments, especially not ones that seemed sincere. "I think you may need to have your eyes examined, Mr. Winchester. Most people in this town would disagree with your assessment." "Warren," he corrected gently. "And most people are fools." She did not know what to say to that, so she remained silent, watching the dancers spin and twirl. The music was lively, and she found her foot tapping along to the rhythm despite herself. "Would you like to dance?" Warren asked suddenly. Penelope turned to stare at him, certain she had misheard. "What? Would you like to dance?" he repeated, setting down his cup and extending his hand. "That is why people come to these things, is it not?" "I am rather tall," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Taller than most men. It makes dancing awkward." Warren looked at her for a long moment, and then he did something she did not expect. He stepped closer, positioning himself so she could see exactly how tall he was compared to her. The top of her head came to about his eyebrow level. She would need to look up only slightly to meet his eyes. "Seems to me we would fit just fine," he said quietly. "Unless you just do not want to dance with me, which would be perfectly understandable. I am not much of a dancer." Penelope felt something flutter in her chest, something she had not felt in years. Hope, perhaps, or excitement. She looked into Warren's gray eyes and saw nothing but honest interest and a hint of nervousness that suggested he genuinely worried she might refuse him. "I would like to dance," she said, taking his offered hand. They moved onto the floor, and Penelope was aware of the conversation stopping, of heads turning to watch. But for once, she did not care. Warren's hand was warm and steady on her waist, his other hand holding hers gently, and as the music started, they began to move together. He was not an elegant dancer, but he was competent and confident. He led her through the steps without hesitation, and Penelope found herself relaxing into the rhythm. She had not danced in years, had forgotten how wonderful it felt to move to music with a partner. "You are a good dancer," Warren said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "So are you," she replied. "I am adequate," he corrected with a small smile. "You, however, are graceful. That is rare in someone so tall. Usually, tall people move like newborn foals, all legs and uncertainty." Penelope laughed, a genuine sound that surprised her. "That is exactly how I usually feel." "You do not move that way, though," Warren said. "You move like you know exactly where your feet are going to land." It was one of the nicest things anyone had ever said to her, and Penelope felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them away quickly, not wanting to cry in the middle of the dance floor. They danced 2 more songs together, and with each one, Penelope felt more of the tension she always carried begin to ease. Other people were still watching, she could feel their eyes, but Warren's attention never wavered from her. He asked her about Sacramento, about how she was adjusting to Genoa, about what she thought of Nevada. His questions were genuine, and he listened to her answers with real interest. When the music finally paused, Warren escorted her back to the wall, but he did not leave. He stayed beside her, talking easily about his ranch, about the horses he raised, about the challenges of making a living in such unforgiving country. "It sounds like hard work," Penelope said. "It is," Warren agreed, "but it is honest work and it is mine. I came out here 5 years ago with almost nothing, and now I have a working ranch with good grazing land and a small herd that grows every year. There is satisfaction in building something with your own hands." Penelope understood that feeling. She had been sewing and mending clothes for money since she was old enough to hold a needle, saving every penny, dreaming of someday having her own dress shop. But that dream felt impossibly far away most days. "You work?" Warren asked. "I help my aunt with her sewing," Penelope said. "She takes in mending and alterations, and I do most of the actual work. I am good with a needle." "I do not doubt it," Warren said, glancing at her dress. "Did you make that?" She nodded, self-conscious about the simple garment. "Finding ready-made dresses in my size is impossible, so I learned to sew my own clothes." "It is well made," Warren observed. "The stitching is even and the fit is good. That takes skill." Penelope was not used to anyone noticing such things, least of all a rancher. Most men would not know good stitching from poor. The evening continued, and Warren stayed by her side. He danced with her twice more, and during the times they were not dancing, he talked with her as though they were old friends. He introduced her to people, speaking of her with respect and easy courtesy that made it clear he thought well of her. And slowly, Penelope noticed that people's attitudes toward her seemed to shift slightly. If Warren Winchester thought she was worth knowing, perhaps she was not so strange after all. When the dance finally ended and people began heading home, Warren walked with Penelope and Dorothy back to their house. The night air was cool and pleasant after the warmth of the crowded hall, and the stars overhead were brilliant in the clear Nevada sky. "Thank you for the dances," Penelope said as they reached her front gate. "It was very kind of you." "It was not kindness," Warren said seriously. "I enjoyed dancing with you. You are easy to talk to and I like the way you laugh." Penelope felt her heart skip. No man had ever said anything like that to her before. "Well, good night then," she said, suddenly shy. "Good night, Miss Sutherland," Warren said, tipping his hat. Then he smiled. "I hope I might see you again soon." "I would like that," she admitted. She watched him walk away into the darkness, his tall form eventually disappearing around a corner. Dorothy touched her arm gently. "He seems like a good man," her aunt said. "Yes," Penelope agreed softly. "He does." That night, Penelope lay in bed, unable to sleep. She kept replaying the evening in her mind, remembering how it had felt to dance with Warren, to talk with him, to be treated like a normal woman instead of a curiosity or an object of pity. It had been wonderful and terrifying all at once, because she knew that this might be a singular experience, a brief moment of acceptance in a lifetime of rejection. But when she finally drifted off to sleep, she was smiling. The next morning was Sunday, and Penelope dressed carefully for church. She chose her blue dress, the one that made her eyes look brighter, and she took extra time with her hair, pinning it up in a way that was neat but not severe. "You look lovely, dear," Dorothy said with an approving smile. The church in Genoa was a simple white building with a tall steeple, and it was always well attended. Penelope and Dorothy took their usual place in the back, where Penelope always sat so that her height would not block anyone's view of the minister. The service had just begun when Warren slipped into the pew beside her. He nodded politely to Dorothy, then turned his attention to the front, as though sitting next to Penelope was the most natural thing in the world. Penelope's heart was racing. She could feel people turning to look, could sense their curiosity and speculation. But Warren seemed completely unaware of the attention, or perhaps he simply did not care. After the service, As people mingled outside in the sunshine, Warren stayed close to Penelope. When Mrs. Henderson approached with Margaret, clearly intending to introduce her daughter to Warren, he politely acknowledged them but did not move away from Penelope's side. "Mr. Winchester," Mrs. Henderson said with a bright smile. "Have you met my daughter, Margaret? She is quite accomplished at the piano." "We have met," Warren said pleasantly. "Good morning, Miss Henderson." Margaret batted her eyelashes in a way that Penelope suspected was meant to be charming. "I do hope you enjoyed the dance last night, Mr. Winchester." "I did," Warren said. "Miss Sutherland here is an excellent dancer." The comment clearly surprised Mrs. Henderson, and her smile became a bit fixed. "How nice. Well, we must be going. Good day." As they walked away, Penelope heard Margaret's petulant voice saying, "Mother, why would he be interested in her? She is practically a giant." Penelope felt the familiar sting of those words, but Warren touched her elbow gently. "Pay them no mind," he said quietly. "Some people measure worth by the strangest standards." "Height is not that strange a standard," Penelope said, trying to keep her voice light. "Especially when one is freakishly tall." Warren stopped walking and turned to face her directly. "You are not freakishly anything. You are tall, yes, but there is nothing wrong with that. You stand straight and proud, and you have a kind face and intelligent eyes. Any man would be lucky to know you." Penelope felt tears threatening again. She seemed to cry so easily around Warren, though they were not tears of sadness. "You barely know me, Mr. Winchester." "Warren," he corrected for what felt like the 100th time. "And you are right, I do not know you well yet, but I would like to. Would you allow me to call on you this week? Perhaps Tuesday afternoon, if that would be convenient." Penelope's breath caught. He was asking to court her. Properly, officially court her. "I would like that very much," she managed to say. Warren's face lit up with a smile that transformed him from handsome to beautiful. "Tuesday afternoon, then. I will see you at 2 o'clock." The next 2 days passed with agonizing slowness. Penelope tried to keep busy, helping her aunt with the mending and cleaning the house until everything sparkled. But time seemed to crawl. She found herself constantly watching the clock, counting down the hours until Warren would arrive. Dorothy watched her niece's nervous energy with amusement. "He clearly likes you, dear. You do not need to worry so much." "But what if he changes his mind?" Penelope asked. "What if he realizes that courting someone like me will make people talk, and he decides it is not worth the trouble?" "If he does that, then he is not the man I think he is," Dorothy said firmly. "But I do not believe he will. That young man looked at you as though you were the only woman in the world." Tuesday finally arrived, and Penelope changed her dress 3 times before settling on the green one that Dorothy said brought out the copper highlights in her brown hair. She was waiting by the window when Warren rode up on a beautiful bay horse, leading a second horse behind him, a gentle-looking mare with a white blaze on her face. Penelope went out to meet him, and Warren dismounted smoothly, smiling at her. "Good afternoon. I thought we might go for a ride if you know how to ride." "I do," Penelope said, though it had been months since she had been on a horse. "Though I must warn you, I am not an expert rider." "That mare is gentle as a lamb," Warren assured her. "Her name is Rosie, and she would never do anything to harm her rider." Warren helped Penelope mount, his hand steadying her waist as she settled into the saddle. Even through the layers of her dress, she could feel the warmth and strength of his touch, and it made her feel both nervous and safe at the same time. They rode out of town at an easy pace, heading into the open land beyond the scattered houses. The day was warm but not oppressive, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of sage and dust. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still holding patches of snow despite the summer heat. "This is beautiful," Penelope said, breathing in the clean air. It is, Warren agreed. When I first came out here, I was overwhelmed by how big everything is. The sky, the land, the mountains. Back in Missouri, everything felt closed in and small, but here there is room to breathe. Is that where you are from? Missouri, Warren nodded. Small town outside of Kansas City. I was working my father's farm, but when he died, my older brother inherited everything. There was nothing left for me, so I headed west to see if I could make something of myself. That must have been difficult, Penelope said. Leaving everything you knew behind. It was, Warren admitted. But it was also the best decision I ever made. I built something here that is entirely mine, something no one can take away from me. They rode for a while in comfortable silence, and then Warren guided them toward a grove of cottonwood trees near a small creek. The trees provided shade, and the sound of running water was soothing. They dismounted, and Warren spread a blanket on the ground. From his saddlebag, he produced bread, cheese, and apples. I hope you do not mind a simple meal, he said. I am not much of a cook. It is perfect, Penelope said, sitting down on the blanket. She was acutely aware of how tall she was, even sitting down, and she tried to arrange herself in a way that did not seem too awkward. Warren sat across from her, close enough that their knees almost touched. He cut slices of bread and cheese, handing them to her with an easy smile. Tell me about Sacramento, he said. What was it like growing up there? Penelope thought about how to answer. It was complicated. My parents ran a general store and we lived comfortably. But I started growing taller than other children very young, and by the time I was 12, I was already taller than most grown men. People treated me differently because of it. Children teased me, and adults either pitied me or treated me as though my height made me less of a woman. Warren listened intently, his gray eyes never leaving her face. That must have been lonely. It was, Penelope admitted. I had a few friends, but even they did not really understand. And as I got older and other girls started courting and getting married, I realized that I would probably never have that. No man wanted a wife who towered over him. Their loss, Warren said simply. Penelope smiled sadly. That is kind of you to say, but the reality is that most men want a woman who makes them feel strong and protective. It is hard to feel that way when your wife can reach the top shelf without a stool. Warren was quiet for a moment, and then he said, I think any man worth his salt should want a partner, not a pet. Someone who can stand beside him, not someone who needs to be constantly looked after like a child. Most men do not think that way, Penelope said. Most men are fools, Warren repeated his statement from the dance. I have spent 5 years building my ranch, and I can tell you that the work does not care how tall you are or whether you are a man or a woman. The work just needs to be done. I could use a partner who is strong enough to help, someone who can pull their own weight. Your height would be an advantage on a ranch, not a disadvantage. Penelope stared at him. Are you suggesting that I work on your ranch? I am suggesting, Warren said carefully, that I would like to get to know you better, and that I believe you are exactly the kind of woman who would thrive out here. You are strong, capable, and you do not shrink from challenges. Those are qualities I admire. They talked for hours under the cottonwood trees, sharing stories about their lives, their hopes, their fears. Warren told her about the challenges of ranching, about droughts and wolves and cattle rustlers. Penelope told him about learning to sew, about the satisfaction of creating something beautiful from raw fabric, about her dream of someday having her own shop. You should do it, Warren said. Open a shop, I mean. Genoa does not have a proper dressmaker. Women have to send away for anything nice, or make do with what the general store carries. It takes money to start a business, Penelope said. Money I do not have. Perhaps someday, Warren said. Dreams are meant to be chased, not abandoned. When they finally rode back to town, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Warren helped Penelope dismount at her gate, his hands lingering on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. "May I call on you again?" he asked. "Perhaps this Saturday. We could go to dinner at the hotel." "I would like that," Penelope said, her heart full in a way it had not been in years. Over the next several weeks, Warren courted Penelope with a steady persistence that took her breath away. He called on her twice a week, always punctual, always thoughtful. He brought her wildflowers he had picked on his land, and books he thought she might enjoy, and once, a beautiful piece of fabric he had ordered from San Francisco, perfect for making a dress. They went on picnics and rides, and Warren taught her about ranching, showing her how to recognize good grazing land and healthy cattle. Penelope found herself fascinated by the work, by the rhythms of ranch life, by the way Warren seemed to understand the land and the animals. But it was not all easy. People in town talked, of course. Penelope heard the whispers when she went to the general store, saw the disapproving looks from women like Mrs. Henderson. Some people seemed to think it was inappropriate for a man like Warren to be courting someone like her. Others seemed to think she was not good enough for him. One afternoon, about 6 weeks after they had started courting, Penelope was at the general store when she overheard Mrs. Henderson talking to another woman. "It is just sad, really," Mrs. Henderson was saying. "A fine man like Warren Winchester, and he is wasting his time on that freakishly tall girl. She must have used some kind of witchcraft on him, because I cannot imagine what else would make him interested." "Perhaps he feels sorry for her," the other woman suggested. "Well, he will come to his senses eventually," Mrs. Henderson said confidently. "No man wants a wife who makes him look like a child by comparison." Penelope felt sick. She quickly paid for her purchases and left, walking home as fast as she could. Once there, she went to her room and sat on the bed, her hands shaking. What if they were right? What if Warren was only courting her out of pity? He had never tried to kiss her, had never even held her hand except when helping her on and off her horse. Perhaps he did not truly feel anything for her beyond sympathy for her situation. That evening, Warren came to call as planned, but Penelope was distant and quiet. They sat in the parlor with Dorothy present as was proper, and Warren tried several times to engage her in conversation, but she gave only short answers. Finally, Warren asked if he could speak with her alone on the front porch, and Dorothy, sensing something was wrong, agreed. Outside in the soft twilight, Warren turned to Penelope with concern clear on his face. "What is wrong? Have I done something to upset you?" "Why are you courting me?" Penelope asked abruptly. Warren blinked, clearly surprised by the question. "Because I enjoy your company. Because I find you interesting and intelligent and beautiful." "Do not lie to me," Penelope said, her voice shaking. "I heard Mrs. Henderson today. She said you must pity me, and I need to know if that is true. Are you courting me because you feel sorry for me?" Warren's face went through several expressions, surprise giving way to understanding and then to anger. But the anger was not directed at Penelope. "You want to know why I am courting you?" he asked, his voice low and intense. "I am courting you because, from the moment I saw you at that dance, standing tall and proud even though everyone else was ignoring you, I thought you were the most magnificent woman I had ever seen. I am courting you because when we talk, you actually listen and respond thoughtfully, instead of just giggling and agreeing with everything I say like so many women do. I am courting you because you are not afraid of hard work, and because you have dreams and ambitions beyond just finding a husband to take care of you." He took a step closer, his gray eyes blazing with emotion. I am courting you because when I imagine my future, I see you in it. Working beside me on the ranch, building something together, creating a life that is bigger and better than what either of us could create alone. And yes, I am courting you because you are tall, but not in spite of it. Your height is part of who you are, and I happen to think you are perfect exactly as you are. Penelope felt tears streaming down her face. You truly mean that? Every word, Warren said fiercely. He reached up and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. Penelope, I know we have only known each other for a few weeks, but I need you to understand something. I have no interest in pity or charity. I am a practical man, and I do not waste my time on things that do not matter. You matter. You matter more than anything else in my life right now, and I need to know if you feel the same way. I do, Penelope whispered. I feel the same way, but I am frightened. Of what? Of this not being real. Of waking up one day and finding out this was all a dream, or that you changed your mind and realized you could do better. Warren shook his head slowly. I could not do better. There is no better than you. And then he kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, his lips warm against hers, and Penelope felt something inside her chest expand and bloom like a flower opening to the sun. She had never been kissed before, had never thought anyone would want to kiss her, but Warren kissed her as though she was precious and desired. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. Warren rested his forehead against hers, his hands still cupping her face. I love you, he said quietly. I know it is fast, and I know you might not be ready to hear it, but I love you and I needed you to know. I love you too, Penelope said, the words feeling both terrifying and absolutely right. I did not think I could love anyone or that anyone could love me, but I love you, Warren Winchester. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Penelope wrapped her arms around his neck, marveling at how perfectly they fit together despite all her fears about her height. With Warren, she did not feel too tall or too much. She felt exactly right. They courted for 3 more months, and during that time, Penelope found that people's attitudes toward her began to shift. Warren made it clear through his actions and his words that he loved her and intended to marry her. And slowly, grudgingly, some of the townspeople began to accept their relationship. It helped that Penelope began to carry herself differently. With Warren's love supporting her, she stopped hunching her shoulders and trying to make herself smaller. She stood straight and proud, meeting people's eyes instead of looking at the ground. And to her surprise, some people responded positively to this change. Sally Morrison became a good friend, often inviting Penelope to tea and introducing her to other women in town. The minister's wife, Mrs. Garrett, asked Penelope to help with organizing the church social, recognizing her organizational skills. Even Mr. Patterson at the general store began greeting her more warmly. Not everyone came around. Mrs. Henderson remained coldly disapproving, and Margaret Henderson made several pointed comments about how desperate Warren must be to settle for someone like Penelope. But these negative voices became fewer and quieter as time went on. Warren proposed on a cold November evening, 3 days before Thanksgiving. He took Penelope out to his ranch for the first time, showing her the house he had built with his own hands. It was simple but sturdy, with a good roof and real glass windows. The interior was sparse, furnished with only the basics, but it had good bones and plenty of potential. It needs a woman's touch, Warren admitted as they stood in the empty parlor. I built it thinking someday I would have a family, but I never furnished it properly because I was waiting for the right person to help me make it a home. He turned to Penelope, taking both her hands in his. Penelope Sutherland, I know I am not a rich man, and this is not a grand house, and life out here will be hard sometimes. But I promise you that I will work every day to make you happy, to make you feel loved and valued and cherished. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife and my partner and help me build a life here?" Penelope looked into his earnest gray eyes and felt her heart overflow with love. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Warren pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small ruby set in it. "It was my grandmother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "The only thing of value my father left me. I want you to have it." The ring fit perfectly, and Penelope stared at it through tears of joy. Then Warren swept her into his arms and kissed her thoroughly. And for the first time in her life, Penelope felt like she was exactly where she belonged. They were married 2 weeks later in the Genoa church, on a bright December morning when fresh snow dusted the mountains, and the air was crisp and cold. Penelope wore a dress she had made herself, white silk that she had saved for months to buy, with delicate lace at the collar and sleeves. She had sewn every stitch herself, and the dress fit her perfectly, designed for her exact proportions. Dorothy cried through the entire ceremony, happy tears for her niece who had finally found love and acceptance. Sally Morrison and several other friends attended, along with many of Warren's ranch neighbors and friends from town. When Penelope walked down the aisle on her aunt's arm, she held her head high and her shoulders back. She was tall, yes, impossibly tall, but Warren stood at the altar waiting for her with such love in his eyes that nothing else mattered. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. When the minister asked if anyone objected to the marriage, there was a tense moment of silence, and then Warren spoke up in a clear, firm voice. "If anyone does object, they can keep it to themselves, because I am marrying this woman today and nothing is going to stop me." There was surprised laughter, and then the ceremony continued. When Warren and Penelope exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other through all of life's challenges, Penelope felt a sense of peace settle over her. This was real. This was happening. She was becoming Warren Winchester's wife. "You may kiss your bride," the minister said with a smile. Warren cupped Penelope's face in his hands and kissed her soundly, to the applause and cheers of everyone gathered. When they finally broke apart, both of them were grinning like fools. The reception was held at Sally Morrison's boarding house, where tables had been set up with food and drink. People ate and danced and celebrated, and Penelope danced with Warren again and again, remembering that first dance when he had seen past her height to the woman beneath. Near the end of the evening, Mrs. Henderson approached them. Penelope tensed, expecting some cutting remark, but the older woman's face was softer than usual. "Mr. Winchester, Mrs. Winchester," she said formally, "I wish you both happiness in your marriage." It was not a warm blessing, but it was something, and Penelope appreciated the effort it must have taken for the proud woman to offer even that much. As darkness fell, Warren and Penelope rode out to the ranch together, to the home that would now be theirs. The house was cold when they arrived, but Warren quickly built up the fire in the fireplace while Penelope lit the lamps. "Welcome home," Warren said softly, wrapping his arms around her from behind as she stood looking around the parlor. "Home," Penelope repeated, leaning back against his solid warmth. "I like the sound of that." That night, in the big bed Warren had built himself, Penelope learned what it meant to be truly loved and accepted. Warren touched her with reverence and desire, and for the first time in her life, Penelope did not feel self-conscious about her body. Warren loved every inch of her, and he made sure she knew it. Life on the ranch was indeed hard work, but Penelope thrived in a way she never had in town. She learned to ride well, to help with the cattle, to manage the accounts and supplies. She planted a garden in the spring and learned to preserve food for the winter. She sewed curtains for the windows and cushions for the chairs, slowly transforming the sparse house into a warm, welcoming home. Warren was right that her height was an advantage on the ranch. She could reach things easily, could handle heavy loads, could work alongside Warren as a true partner. They built fences together, rounded up cattle together, worked side by side from dawn until dusk during the busy seasons. But there was also time for tenderness. Evening walks along the creek that ran through their property, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Quiet mornings drinking coffee together before the work day began. Nights curled up together in front of the fire, reading or talking or simply enjoying each other's presence. A year after their marriage, Penelope discovered she was pregnant. She was terrified and thrilled in equal measure, wondering how her tall frame would handle carrying a child, but Warren was over the moon with joy. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as though he could not quite believe it. Penelope's pregnancy was difficult. Her height meant the baby had plenty of room to grow, and she carried large. By her 7th month, she could barely move around comfortably, and Warren fussed over her constantly, worried about her health. "I am fine," she kept insisting, even as she struggled to get up from chairs and had to stop working on the ranch. In June of 1880, Penelope went into labor on a sweltering afternoon. Warren rode to town to fetch the midwife, Mrs. Garrett, the minister's wife, and then he paced the front porch anxiously while the women helped Penelope through her labor. It took 18 hours, and Warren wore a path in the porch boards with his pacing, but finally, just as dawn broke, a baby's cry rang out. Mrs. Garrett came to the door with a smile. "You have a son," she announced. "A big, healthy son, and your wife is doing well." Warren rushed inside to find Penelope exhausted but radiant, holding a bundle wrapped in blankets. He approached carefully, as though afraid he might break something, and looked down at his son for the first time. The baby was indeed big, with a shock of dark hair and his father's gray eyes. He looked up at Warren with an unfocused gaze, and Warren felt his heart expand with a love so fierce it almost hurt. "Hello, little one," he said softly, touching the baby's tiny hand. Small fingers wrapped around his thumb, and Warren felt tears on his cheeks. "I am your father." "We need to name him," Penelope said, her voice tired but happy. They had discussed names for months and had finally settled on one they both loved. "William," Warren said. "William Winchester." "William," Penelope repeated, smiling down at their son. "Welcome to the world, William." The next few months were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings, but Penelope and Warren navigated parenthood together, supporting each other through the challenges. William was a good baby, healthy and strong, and he grew quickly. Dorothy visited often, delighted to be a great aunt, and Sally Morrison brought gifts and advice. Even some of the women who had been cold to Penelope before seemed to warm up now that she was a mother. Motherhood, apparently, made her more acceptable in their eyes. But Penelope did not care as much about their approval anymore. She had Warren's love, a beautiful son, and a home she had helped build. She had everything she had ever dreamed of and more. When William was 6 months old, Penelope approached Warren with an idea. "I have been thinking about my dress shop," she said one evening as they sat together after putting the baby to bed. "I know it is not the right time yet, with William so young, but perhaps in a few years. We have that empty room we are not using. I could set up a shop there, take orders from women in town and the surrounding ranches. I would not have to be away from home, and I could earn some money to help with the ranch." Warren considered this, then nodded slowly. "I think it is a good idea. You are talented, and there is definitely a need for a good dressmaker in the area. When you are ready, we will make it happen." Penelope kissed him, grateful as always for his support and belief in her abilities. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and work. The ranch prospered under Warren and Penelope's joint management. They added more cattle, built a bigger barn, and improved the house. Penelope started taking in sewing work when William was 2, and by the time he was 4, she had a thriving business making dresses and suits for people throughout the area. Word spread that Mrs. Winchester was an exceptional seamstress who could fit anyone, no matter their size or shape, and orders came in steadily. Penelope found deep satisfaction in the work, in creating beautiful clothes that made people feel good about themselves. She remembered too well what it was like to struggle finding anything that fit properly, and she made sure all her customers left happy. When William was 5, Penelope became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, and in the spring of 1885, she gave birth to a daughter they named Patricia. Patricia was smaller than William had been, with Penelope's brown eyes and Warren's dark hair. She was a calm, observant baby who seemed to take everything in with quiet intelligence. William was fascinated by his new sister, constantly wanting to help care for her. Warren built a cradle that rocked gently, and William would sit beside it for hours, singing to Patricia in his childish voice. The Winchester family continued to grow and thrive. Warren's ranch became one of the most successful in the area, and Penelope's sewing business brought in steady income. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. In 1887, when a terrible winter storm struck Nevada, Warren and Penelope opened their home to neighbors who had lost livestock or needed help. They shared their supplies and their warmth, and in doing so, they cemented their place in the community as people who could be counted on in times of trouble. By the time William was 10 and Patricia was 5, the Winchester Ranch was a place where people knew they would be welcomed and treated fairly. Warren had earned a reputation as an honest rancher who kept his word, and Penelope was known throughout the region as a skilled dressmaker and a kind woman who never turned away anyone who needed help. One afternoon in the summer of 1890, Penelope was working in her sewing room when she heard a knock at the door. She opened it to find Mrs. Henderson standing there, looking older and more tired than Penelope remembered. "Mrs. Winchester," the older woman said formally, "may I come in?" Penelope stepped aside, surprised but curious. Mrs. Henderson had never visited the ranch before. They sat in the parlor, and for a moment neither woman spoke. Then Mrs. Henderson said, "I owe you an apology." "Several apologies, actually." Penelope waited, saying nothing. "I was cruel to you when you first came to Genoa," Mrs. Henderson continued. "I said terrible things about you, and I encouraged others to treat you poorly. I thought I knew what was best, thought I understood how the world worked, but I was wrong." She looked directly at Penelope. "You have built a good life here. You and your husband have a strong marriage, beautiful children, and a successful ranch. You have proven yourself to be a valuable member of this community. I was wrong about you, and I am sorry for the pain I caused." Penelope was quiet for a moment, processing this unexpected apology. Part of her wanted to reject it, to hold onto the hurt and anger she had felt for so long. But she thought about the life she had built, about Warren and their children, about all the happiness she had found, and she realized that holding on to bitterness would only diminish that happiness. "I accept your apology," she said simply. "Thank you for coming all this way to offer it." Mrs. Henderson looked relieved. "My daughter Margaret married last year," she said. "A wealthy man from Carson City, but she is not happy. He treats her like a decoration, something pretty to display at parties. She has no say in their life, no partnership." And I realized that what you and Mr. Winchester have, that partnership and respect, is worth far more than wealth or social standing. After Mrs. Henderson left, Penelope stood at the window, watching the older woman's carriage disappear down the road. Warren came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What was that about?" he asked. "Closure," Penelope said, leaning back against him, "and a reminder of how lucky I am." Warren turned her around to face him, his gray eyes warm with love. "I am the lucky one. Every day I wake up next to you, I cannot believe you chose me." "We chose each other," Penelope corrected, standing on her toes to kiss him. Even after 12 years of marriage, kissing Warren still made her heart race. The children grew, and the ranch prospered. William showed an aptitude for ranching, learning everything Warren could teach him about horses and cattle and land management. Patricia inherited her mother's talent with a needle and spent hours in the sewing room, creating elaborate dresses for her dolls and eventually for herself. In 1895, when William was 15 and Patricia was 10, tragedy struck the neighboring ranch when their owners died in an accident. The ranch was to be sold, and Warren and Penelope discussed buying it, expanding their own operation. "It would mean taking on debt," Warren said carefully, "and more work than we can probably handle alone." "William is old enough to help more," Penelope pointed out, "and we could hire additional hands. It is good land and it borders our property. It makes sense." They decided to take the risk, and with careful management and hard work from the whole family, they made it work. The expanded ranch became known as the Winchester Sutherland Ranch, honoring both their names, and it became one of the largest and most successful ranching operations in the region. Patricia surprised everyone when, at 16, she announced that she wanted to go to school in San Francisco to study business. "I want to help manage the ranch," she explained, "but I want to understand the business side better, the accounting and contracts and marketing." It was unusual for a young woman to pursue such education, but Warren and Penelope had never believed in limiting their children based on convention. They sent Patricia to San Francisco, and she thrived there, returning 2 years later with a sharp business mind and innovative ideas for expanding the ranch's profitability. William, meanwhile, married at 22, choosing a kind, practical woman named Sarah from a neighboring ranch. They settled into one of the houses on the expanded property and started their own family. As the new century approached, Warren and Penelope, now in their 40s, found themselves entering a new phase of life. They were grandparents, with William and Sarah's children running around the ranch. Patricia managed much of the business side of the operation, though she showed no interest in marriage, preferring to focus on her work. One evening in the summer of 1899, Warren and Penelope sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset. They did this often, taking time to simply be together after a day of work. "You remember the first time we danced?" Warren asked, taking Penelope's hand. "How could I forget?" Penelope said with a smile. "You were the first person who looked at me and did not see a problem to be solved." "I saw the woman I was going to marry," Warren said. "I knew it that night, even though I had just met you." Penelope leaned her head on his shoulder, marveling at how comfortable and right it still felt after more than 20 years of marriage. "The town rejected me for being too tall," she said softly, "until you said I was perfect as I was. You changed my life, Warren Winchester." "You changed mine," Warren replied. "You made me believe that building something worthwhile was possible. This ranch, our family, everything we have, we built it together." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The land stretched out before them, their land, testament to years of hard work and partnership. "I love you," Penelope said, as she had said countless times over the years. "I love you," Warren replied, as he always did. Inside the house, they could hear Patricia going over accounts at the desk, her quick mind sorting through numbers and projections. From the smaller house across the yard came the sound of their grandchildren laughing, playing some game before bedtime. The ranch was quiet in the evening, but it was the quietness of contentment, of a life well lived. In the years that followed, the Winchester Sutherland Ranch continued to thrive. Warren and Penelope gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations, letting William and Patricia take over more responsibility. They spent their time enjoying their grandchildren, tending a large garden, and traveling occasionally to see the West they had helped settle. Penelope continued sewing, though now it was mostly for pleasure rather than income. She made quilts for each of her grandchildren, taught Patricia's daughter how to sew, and created elaborate costumes for the children's games. Warren remained active on the ranch, unable to fully step away from the work he loved. He taught his grandsons to ride, to rope cattle, to understand and respect the land that provided their livelihood. In 1905, the town of Genoa held a celebration for its 50th anniversary, and Warren and Penelope were honored as founding citizens who had contributed significantly to the community's growth and prosperity. At the ceremony, the mayor spoke about how the Winchesters had proven that success came not from conforming to expectations, but from hard work, partnership, and treating everyone with respect. Penelope, now 49 and still as tall as ever, stood before the crowd with her head held high. She thought about that frightened young woman who had arrived in Genoa so many years ago, desperate for acceptance and convinced she would never find it. She thought about all the pain and rejection she had endured because of her height. And then she looked at Warren standing beside her, his hair now streaked with gray, but his gray eyes still full of love when he looked at her. She thought about their children and grandchildren, about the ranch they had built, about the life they had created together. "I would like to say something," she said, stepping forward. The crowd quieted, curious. "When I came to this town, I believed that being different meant being less," Penelope said, her voice clear and strong. "I believed that because I was tall, I was somehow wrong, broken, unworthy of love or respect. But I learned something important here in Genoa. I learned that being different is not a weakness. It is simply being yourself." She smiled, looking out at the faces in the crowd, some familiar and friendly, others still somewhat skeptical. "I also learned that it takes just one person believing in you to change everything. My husband saw past my height to the woman I was, and his belief in me gave me the strength to believe in myself. I hope that if there are any young people here today who feel different or wrong or unworthy, you will remember that. It takes just one person to make a difference." The crowd applauded, and several young women, some of them unusually tall themselves, had tears in their eyes. After the ceremony, a few of them approached Penelope, thanking her for her words. "I am 6 feet tall," one girl said, a teenager with anxious eyes. "Everyone says I will never marry because no man wants a tall wife, but seeing you and Mr. Winchester gives me hope. You will find someone who sees you for who you truly are," Penelope assured her, "and that person will think you are perfect exactly as you are." As Warren and Penelope rode home that evening in their comfortable carriage, pulled by horses they had raised themselves, Warren took her hand. "That was a good speech," he said. "It was the truth," Penelope replied. "You saved me, Warren. You gave me a life I never dreamed possible." "We saved each other," Warren corrected gently. "Before I met you, I was building a ranch but not a life. You gave me purpose beyond just acquiring land and cattle. You gave me love and partnership and a reason to build something that would last beyond my own lifetime." They grew old together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. In 1910, they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together family and friends from across Nevada. William and Sarah had 4 children now, all of them healthy and thriving. Patricia had finally married, choosing a lawyer from Carson City who appreciated her sharp mind and business acumen. They had 2 children and divided their time between the city and the ranch. The Winchester Sutherland Ranch had become one of the most successful operations in Nevada, spanning thousands of acres and employing dozens of workers. But it was still a family ranch at its heart, run on principles of fairness and hard work that Warren and Penelope had established from the beginning. When Warren turned 60 in 1912, Penelope threw him a surprise party. Everyone they had ever known seemed to be there, and Warren stood in the center of the celebration, looking around in wonder. "I cannot believe all these people came," he said to Penelope. "You touch a lot of lives," she told him. "People remember kindness and fairness." "You have been both of those things to everyone you have ever met." "We have been those things," Warren corrected. "I could not have done any of this without you." In 1915, the world was changing rapidly. News of war in Europe reached even their remote corner of Nevada, and they worried about what it might mean for their grandchildren. But on the ranch, life continued its familiar rhythms. Cattle were born, crops were planted and harvested, and the work went on. Penelope was 59 now, her hair more gray than brown, her tall frame perhaps slightly stooped from years of work. But she was still strong and vital, still sewing and gardening and helping manage the ranch business. Warren, at 63, moved a bit slower than he once had, but he was still riding and working every day, unable to imagine a life without the ranch that had given him so much. One evening that fall, as they sat on their porch watching another sunset, Warren said, "Have I told you lately that you are beautiful?" Penelope laughed. "I am an old woman, Warren. Beautiful is not the word most people would use." "Then most people are blind," Warren said firmly. "You are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, and you have been since the moment I first saw you at that dance. Your beauty never came from youth or fashion. It came from the strength of your character, the kindness of your heart, and the way you stand tall and proud, comfortable in your own skin. Those things do not fade with age." Penelope felt tears prick at her eyes. After all these years, Warren could still make her feel like that uncertain young woman at her first dance, thrilled and amazed that someone saw her as beautiful. "I love you," she said. "More today than yesterday, and I loved you very much yesterday." "I love you too," Warren replied. "More than words can say." They sat together as the sun set on another day, another year, another decade of their life together. Inside the house, Patricia was cooking dinner, filling the air with good smells. From across the yard came the voices of grandchildren playing. The ranch hummed with life and activity, a testament to everything they had built together. Years continued to pass, and Warren and Penelope entered their 70s. They were blessed with great-grandchildren now, small faces that looked up at them with innocent wonder. They told stories of the old days, of building the ranch from nothing, of the challenges they had faced and overcome together. In 1925, at the age of 73, Warren became ill. It started as a simple cold but developed into pneumonia. Despite the best efforts of doctors from Carson City, he grew weaker. Penelope rarely left his bedside, holding his hand and talking to him about their life together, reminding him of all the joy they had shared. "You remember our first dance?" she asked him one evening as he drifted in and out of consciousness. Warren's eyes opened, and for a moment they were as clear and alert as they had ever been. How could I forget? The most beautiful woman in the room, and no one else could see it but me. I knew I was the luckiest man alive. I was the lucky one, Penelope said, tears streaming down her face. You gave me everything, Warren. You gave me a life, a family, love beyond measure. We gave those things to each other, Warren said, his voice weak but certain. He squeezed her hand with what strength he had left. Promise me you will not mourn too long. Promise me you will keep living, keep being the strong woman I fell in love with. I promise, Penelope said, though she could not imagine life without him. Warren Winchester died peacefully the next morning, surrounded by his family. He was 73 years old and had lived a full, rich life. He was buried on a hill overlooking the ranch, in a spot he had picked out years ago, where he could see the mountains in the distance and the land he had loved so well. Penelope mourned deeply, but she kept her promise. She continued living, continued being involved with the ranch and her family. She found solace in her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, in the work of her hands, in the memories of her life with Warren. She lived for 7 more years, remaining sharp and active until the very end. She saw the ranch continue to prosper under Patricia's management, saw William's grandchildren begin to take on responsibilities of their own. She saw the family she and Warren had created continue to grow and thrive. On a warm evening in June 1932, Penelope sat on the porch of the home she and Warren had built together. She was 80 years old and tired, but content. Patricia sat beside her, holding her hand. "Tell me again about the first time you met Papa," Patricia said, as she had asked countless times over the years. Penelope smiled, her eyes distant with memory. "I was standing against the wall at a dance, and no one would look at me because I was too tall. And then your father walked in and he looked right at me and he smiled. And when he asked me to dance, he told me I was perfect exactly as I was. No one had ever said that to me before. And you lived happily ever after," Patricia finished. "Yes," Penelope said softly. "We did. 50 years of happiness, of partnership, of building a life together. I could not have asked for more." That night, Penelope passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was buried beside Warren on the hill overlooking the ranch, and at her funeral, people came from across the state to pay their respects. They spoke of her kindness, her strength, her talent with a needle, her sharp business mind. They spoke of the love she and Warren had shared, a love so evident and deep that it had inspired others to believe in the possibility of true partnership in marriage. The Winchester Sutherland Ranch continued for generations after that, passing down through the family. And on that hill, 2 graves stood side by side, marking the resting place of Warren Winchester and Penelope Sutherland Winchester. Their story became legend in the family, told and retold to each new generation, a reminder that love sees past differences and finds the true worth of a person. The town of Genoa, Nevada, grew and changed over the decades, but the Winchester Sutherland Ranch remained, a testament to what 2 people could build when they truly worked as partners. And somewhere in the histories of the town, there was always a note about the woman who was too tall and the cowboy who told her she was perfect as she was, and how their love had created something that lasted long after they were gone. Their great-great-grandchildren still ran the ranch in the modern age, and in the old house that Warren had built with his own hands, now preserved as a historical site, visitors could still see Penelope's sewing room with her original sewing machine, and Warren's office with his journals documenting decades of ranch management. They could see photographs of the couple at various ages, always standing together, Penelope tall and proud, Warren gazing at her with unmistakable love. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right across the Nevada hills, workers on the ranch swore they could feel the presence of those two, still walking the land they had loved, still together even in death as they had been in life, an eternal testament to the power of seeing past the surface to the person within and loving them exactly as they were.